I know three little, simple things. 1, God exists. 2, he is wise. And 3, he loves me. Those are not my words, although I do believe them. Those are the words of a man by the name of Michael Morton. And I recently read his autobiography, which absolutely gutted me. This is a picture of Michael Morton, his wife Christine Morton, and their son Eric, taken in the 1980s when they were a happy family living in a suburban town in Texas. But in 1986, tragedy struck their family when Christine Morton was brutally murdered. In 1987, Michael Morton was convicted of that murder and sentenced to prison. At the age of 32, he went to jail. The thing was, Michael never killed Christine. He was an innocent man who spent 25 years of his life in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was imprisoned because the evidence proving his innocence and identifying another, the guilty party, was withheld from the trial. Their 3-year-old son, Eric, was an eyewitness to the murder. That was withheld from the trial. A bandana found near the crime scene with blood on it, which had the DNA of the actual murderer, that was withheld from the trial. He was framed, and an amazing organization in the United States called the Innocence Project, which takes on cases just like Michael Morton's in order to free innocent people, took on his case so that at the age of 57, he would be released from prison. And as a result of the trial being reopened, the actual murderer would be found. Now, there's much that I could say about Michael Morton, which would be a whole other talk in itself. But I wanted to begin with the story of the Morton family in order for us to have a thought experiment. I would like us to imagine for a moment that it didn't take 25 years to find the actual murderer. I want to imagine for a moment that days following the murder, the actual murderer was found. Now imagine that when that trial happened, imagine Michael standing up in the courtroom, in front of the jury, in front of the judge, in front of the lawyers, and saying, "You killed my wife, and you deserve to go to jail. But I am standing up to say I will willingly go in your place. Send me instead." We can't even imagine Michael doing that, nor should Michael even consider doing that if that were to have been the case. It would be crazy. Except that's essentially what Jesus did for us. We're told in the scriptures the wages of sin are death. We sinned, we separated ourselves from God. The consequence of our choice was death. And then Jesus, God himself, innocent, comes forward and says, "You deserve death, but I am going to take your place." That is the gospel message. That is a message of freedom, and that is a message of hope. And that is a message that usually at least one audience member at a sports event always tries to remind people of when they have a big cardboard sign that says John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have eternal life." Who is his only son? Who is Jesus? I love asking questions of children and seeing what comes to their mind. And the other evening, as I was working on my presentation, my 4-year-old nephew, who I live with, was unwilling to go to sleep. And so he was up late with my sister and I. And I thought, what would a 4-year-old say if I asked him, "Who is God?" And so I looked at Gerard. He was half asleep, half awake, but refused to go to his room. And I said, "Gerard, who is Jesus?" He just kind of stared ahead and he goes, God. He knew Jesus is God. But we might say, but who is he really? Well, if we want to know who Jesus really is, we need to read his autobiography. You want to know who Michael Morton is? Read Getting Life. It's an amazing autobiography. You want to learn who Jesus is? His autobiography comes in 4 parts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now you may say, well, that's a biography, but it was divinely inspired, so it really is God's biography. It is Christ's biography. Who is Jesus? Well, when we read the Gospels, we get a sense of who he is. We see what I like to call his trademarks: mercy, forgiveness. That is the gospel message. We're guilty, but he, the innocent, will take our place so our sins can be forgiven and we can spend eternity with him. Mercy, forgiveness, peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He wants us to be free of our anxiety. Next time you're at Mass, pay attention to how many references there are to peace. Peace be with you. My peace I live you. Free us from anxiety. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's a healer. You read the Gospels. Continually, the sick, the weary, the wounded, physically and mentally, are brought to him. They come to him. He touches them and heals them. And Jesus is also about transformation. He loves us as we are, but loves us enough to not let us stay there, but wants us to be who we were made to be. And so he wants us to continually change our lives, as painful as that is, as we saw in the Chisel movie this morning, to change our lives, to transform our lives, to conform our ways to his laws, because that's what we were made for, and that's where we'll find fulfillment. Today, and this year with the theme, we're asked to consider how to proclaim Jesus with loving hearts. In a sense, if we're going to proclaim Jesus with loving hearts, we essentially become ambassadors, representatives for him, the way someone could be a representative or an ambassador for a country. In fact, that very word is used in the scriptures. In 2 Corinthians, we're told we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. One of my mentors, a man by the name of Scott Klusendorf, used to work for a Christian apologetics organization, which in its ministry frequently talks about the importance of being good ambassadors for Christ. And they highlight 3 qualities of a good ambassador. They say someone who is a good ambassador for the gospel, for Jesus, first of all, has knowledge. They have an accurately informed mind. But that's not enough. Then they have wisdom. And wisdom is an artful method. And finally, they have character, which is an attractive manner. So if we want to proclaim Jesus with loving hearts, we need knowledge, we need wisdom, and we need character. And so what I want to do this afternoon is look at each one of those in more detail through the lens of my own faith journey, my own life experience, and how life has taught me the necessity of knowledge, wisdom, and character when it comes to proclaiming Jesus with loving hearts. In terms of knowledge, we're told in 1 Peter, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you. Always be prepared to make a defense. Are you prepared to make a defense? I'm still working on it, but I can tell you that there was a time where I was really unprepared to make a defense. And that was my first year of university. As was mentioned, I went to St. John Brebeuf, had a wonderful experience. I think it's a fantastic high school, and I know a bunch of my old teachers are here today. And I grew up in what is called the Bible Belt out in Chilliwack. And so I look at my first 18 years of my life as being raised in a bubble. My parents were very careful about what people I hung out with, which were essentially people who thought like them and raised their children like they were raising me. And then what I was taught at SJB complemented and commended what my parents taught. There was a real synergy going on. And it was safe and it was good. And then in 1998, I graduated and I moved to the big city of Vancouver. And I moved to live on campus at UBC. And my bubble burst. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who didn't believe what I believed, who acted in ways I was told I shouldn't act. In my dorm, there were sleepovers in people's rooms that were really different from the kinds of sleepovers that I'd had in high school. And I remember encountering people, because I would bless myself in the cafeteria and say grace, people would say, oh, she's a Catholic. So then they would start to ask me questions. Well, why do you have a pope? Why do you pray to Mary? Why is contraception wrong? Why is abortion wrong? Why? And I suddenly found out that I didn't have answers. I could explain the claim, but not give the reasons behind it. So what do you do when you find yourself in a situation where you can't give an answer? Usually you go one of two ways. The first is to say, clearly I've been taught garbage my whole life, and abandon the belief. The second thing is to say, well, I don't know the reasons, but I know they must be out there, and so you go on a search. Well, in my case, I'm Scottish. Now, you might think that's totally random, and you also might say, well, you don't sound Scottish. Okay, right, but I can sound Scottish. And my old high school teacher, Alan Ferguson's here, and what I'd like to know is, who do you think's got a better Scottish accent? Is it Alan Ferguson, or is it Stephanie Gray? Okay, right, I think it's me. Anyways, there are a few things that kind of are defining marks of Scottish people, and there's one in particular I'd like to highlight. We're stubborn. Really stubborn. And so when people started asking me questions and I didn't have answers, I got stubborn and I thought, I know it's right. I have to find the answers. So what do? Well, you go where you've been nourished and you go where you've been fed. And so I went back to SJB. I picked up the phone. I called my old high school teacher, Mr. Glowinek, and I said, Glowinek, I need answers. So then he said, Stephanie, you got to read this book. So I got this book, Catholicism and Fundamentalism. And in my dorm, on my floor, there were two guys on my floor. One was Tom, the agnostic, and one was Todd, the former Catholic, studying to become a Protestant pastor. So Tom would come to me and ask me questions, and then he'd go to Todd, and Todd would give him his answers. So I got the book Glowinek told me about. And I started reading the book. So Tom would come to me and I'd say, well, let's go to chapter 5. And I just did oral readings for Tom. And I was learning as I was teaching. That year, Tom became Catholic. He married a Catholic woman and has 6 Catholic children. All because I didn't have answers. But I sought them out. I went where I'd been fed, and I was fed further. And so when it comes to proclaiming Christ, we need an accurately informed mind. And that means we need to seek, and we shall find. I experienced that. The answers were there. They made so much sense, not only impacting my life, but Tom's life as well. So I encourage you, if you have any questions that you feel aren't really answered well, this website, Catholic.com, is amazing in giving an apologetic, a defense of the reasons behind the claims that we make. So we need to have knowledge if we're going to proclaim Christ, but we also need to have wisdom. And wisdom is an artful method. Wisdom is about discerning how to communicate the knowledge that we have. And if we want to be wise, we need to look to He who is wisdom itself, Jesus. And we see throughout the scriptures, throughout the Gospels, again, that autobiography, we see Jesus showing us by example how to have wisdom when communicating with others. When Jesus communicates with others, he tells lots of stories and he asks lots of questions. That's what we want to do as we're proclaiming Christ with loving hearts. We want to tell stories. As teachers, you know that so well, that analogies to things people can relate to and understand is a powerful teaching tool. And then there's questions. When asked, cause the other person to think, gets the wheels turning in their mind. The idea of asking questions is really what is behind the statement in one of my favorite prayers, the prayer of St. Francis, also known as the Peace Prayer. In the middle of that prayer, we say, O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand. Questions are about seeking to understand the other person. And when we seek to understand, we often become aware that the track we were on, we need to hop off of. And the Holy Spirit might have something else in mind. And I'd like to give you an example or several examples from my own experience. As was mentioned, I've been speaking in different parts of the world for over a decade now, primarily on the topic of abortion, but other topics as well. And several years ago, I was in Florida doing a pro-life exhibit. And after a presentation I gave in a training seminar, a philosophy student came up to me defending abortion. And so we were going back and forth, having a very intellectual discussion. And he came up with a definition of personhood that excluded preborn children. And after we went round and round and round, at one point, I just looked at him and I said, look, in my world, you're safe. Because in my world, by being a member of the human family, you're a person. But in your world, I said, in your world, you could become a victim of your philosophy. Because in your world, you've come up with a definition of person that's arbitrary, that excludes the preborn, but someone could come along in your world more stronger than you, more influential than you, and they could come up with an arbitrary definition too, except that definition could exclude you. In your world, you're not safe. In my world, you are. And he looked at me with fire in his eyes, and he said, in your world, I wouldn't exist. I had no idea what he meant, but I knew that wisdom demanded I seek to understand. And so I asked a question. I said, what do you mean? And he looked at me and he said, my mom had an abortion. She had an abortion shortly before she got pregnant with me. If she'd never have had the abortion, she never would have conceived me. And in that moment, it was like the scales fell from my eyes. And I thought about the pain he must live with, knowing that his very existence hinges on ending the existence of his sibling. What a painful reality that must be. And in that moment, I realized I had encountered him not to have an intellectual discussion, but to love him, to ask him how his mom was doing, to ask him if he ever thought about that sibling. As I reflected on that encounter, I'm reminded of a book I read called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. In this book, there's a simple experiment that is described, imagining 3 buckets of water in front of you. Imagine my left hand is in the left hand bucket of water, which is cold water. I put my right hand in the other bucket, which is hot water. And in between those 2 extreme buckets is another bucket which has lukewarm water. After a few moments, I take my left hand out of the cold water and put it in the lukewarm water. I'm going to think the temperature is what? Hot. Then I take my right hand out of the hot water, put it in the lukewarm water. I'm going to think the temperature is what? Cold. Both of them are actually wrong. Objectively, it's lukewarm. But the previous experience is coloring the present interpretation. And I realized that discussion I'd been having with that student was being impacted by his life experience. And if we want to truly win people, we need to seek to understand those people and allow their stories and their pain to be heard. I saw that in another experience in my work a few years ago. A Catholic physician contacted me. A patient of hers was just a few days shy of the 20th week of pregnancy, halfway through. And she had had an ultrasound done and found out that she was pregnant with a baby girl. And so she came to this Catholic physician to inform her that she wanted a sex-selective abortion because she did not want a girl. And this doctor called me asking for advice for how she could make sure she wasn't at all involved with this abortion. Did she have a legal right not to be? Yes, she did. And how she could try to dissuade this patient. And so I spent time compiling resources, talking to her on the phone, connecting her to a Mandarin-speaking physician in the city that she lives in that I knew. They met that night, shared resources, and she planned a whole bunch of information to share with her patient the following day. And when that doctor got back to me about how that encounter went, she shared with me that she was praying the night before the meeting with the patient. And in her prayer, she really felt God saying to her, "Let this woman know how much I love her." And so she went into the meeting. Patient came to her office, and she sought to understand, why do you want the abortion? And what came out was something this physician had never discovered about her own patient. That this woman was raised in a home in which she was taught that her life was meaningless because she was a girl. She was often forced into a tiny closet, which was then locked up. And she was deprived of food and of water and of the toilet. And then when it got really cold outside, her parents opened the door and pushed her out. This woman didn't want to kill a little girl. She wanted to spare a girl the kind of suffering that she herself had faced. That's what happens when we seek to understand. We realize where the person is coming from, and we start to address that, helping the person see that the choice that they're going to make isn't going to undo the trauma they experienced. And because they experienced a trauma, it doesn't mean the victim will become a victimizer. They can choose another way. And this patient said to the doctor that she felt for the first time in talking with this physician that she met someone who truly cared about her. And several months later, a baby girl was born. And that woman and her husband expressed to this physician how grateful they were for her love. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand. Sometimes wisdom demands that we not only ask questions and seek to understand, but we just be present to the other person, getting to know who they are and setting aside any kind of agenda to advance an argument. I experienced that a few years ago when some medical students bringing me to their medical school to organize a debate managed to find one of Canada's few late-term abortionists willing to debate me. He does abortions up to 1 day shy of the 6th month of pregnancy. Around the time of that debate, I had, with the Holy Spirit's inspiration, come up with an idea that before my debates, I would send an email to my opponent and ask them if they'd like to go for coffee beforehand, with one rule. And the one rule is that we are not, under any circumstances, to discuss abortion, because that's what the debate is for. I said instead, the coffee is about getting to know each other as people. And remarkably, this abortionist was willing to go for coffee. And so on 3 occasions, we have sat down over at Tim's, and we have talked about our families and our lives and our travels, things we've done. This man, for over a year, had protesters outside his home every single day. And his encounter with pro-lifers was always at an arm's length. Those people over there, separate from me. But suddenly an opportunity arose where there was no placard in between us, no protest we were present at, but instead one person looking into the eyes of another person and seeing there is something good and there is something beautiful in that person, no matter the choices that they've made. After our debate, he shook my hand the first time after the first debate. He shook my hand and said, "We should do this again sometime." I thought, that's just so weird. Why would he want to do it again? The truth always wins. But I thought that even though he seemed to enjoy the coffee, and even though he participated fine in the debate, that there was something that I hadn't explicitly said to him that I felt the Holy Spirit telling me to say. And so I sent him a follow-up email. And I said, I don't know if you believe in God, Dr. Fellows, but the God I believe in loves you very much. He delights in you. You are his creation, and your worth is in what you are, and it is not nullified by what you do. His love is so great that when we fail at living up to our dignity, when our actions betray who we are, he will forgive us when we ask, and he will help us to change. So wisdom is that artful method that tells us to tell parables, to ask questions, to seek to understand, and to just meet someone where they're at, look into their eyes, realizing that you're looking into the face of Christ. Finally, if we're to proclaim Jesus with loving hearts, we need character. And character is an attractive manner. Character is about ensuring everything about who we are and how we come across complements and commends our message. What's our message? Back to who is Jesus. He's merciful, he forgives, he heals, and he transforms. He doesn't want people to stay as they are. He loves us there, but he wants us to become better. He wants us to be better than we are right now. He wants us to be transformed. And that means if we're to have that attractive manner, our actions have to be consistent with our claims as Christians. And it's not always easy to do that. And I found myself in a great moral dilemma in my first year at UBC. See, years ago, I had great plans not to become a public speaker, but to become a famous actress. And in my final year at SJB, I did extra work on X-Files and a Sunny Delight commercial and thought I was going to go to Hollywood. So when I went to UBC, I thought, well, I'm going to do theater. And I did an audition, a general audition, and I got accepted to only one play. And I knew that this was my chance to make it into the theater program, and so I accepted the acceptance. And then I read the script. And I realized you should read the script before you accept the part. And so there was some content in the script that I felt went against my Catholic beliefs. And I found myself in a dilemma thinking, I want to be in this play. I need to be in this play. It's the only way I'm going to advance my plans to do theater and act. But part of this play just doesn't jive with my beliefs. What do I do? And I wrestled, and I didn't want to back out. But the more I thought, the more I prayed, the more I consulted wise spiritual directors, I thought, I can't do this. And then I heard about a pro-life conference coming up in Eastern Canada that was scheduled to be the exact same weekend as the dress rehearsal of the play. And I took that as my final sign that I should back out of this play, because if I do, I'm doing the right thing, and I'm free to go to the conference. So I did. And the conference changed my life. And it was there where I heard a pro-life speaker who said, there are more people working full-time to kill babies than there are working full-time to save them. It was like in that moment, the Holy Spirit grabbed my heart and the heart of my friend, Athena, and the two of us looked at each other and said, we have to work full-time in the pro-life movement. So doors started closing in the direction of acting and opening in the direction of speaking. And in 2002, when Athena and I graduated, we both pursued full-time pro-life work. She's now a sister with the Sisters of Life, Athena McCapigal, Sister Antoniana, graduate of STA. And my full-time pro-life work manifested a little differently, but nonetheless carried on. But it is hard to do the right thing. It wasn't easy to make my actions consistent with my claims. And so if we're going to have that attractive manner, that character, we need to exercise our non-physical muscles of discipline and of doing the right thing. And so one little recommendation I want to make for you is what I do every morning. I think about things that I consume in a day, and there's 3 in particular: coffee, tea, and 85% dark chocolate or gummy bears. And so each morning, I close my eyes and I put my hand in this box and I say, Lord, whatever sacrifice will help me grow in holiness and discipline, please help me pick it. And I pull out a piece of paper. And you watch, the day you are scheduled to go to a tea room with your girlfriends, that's when you get tea. And the day you're going to a baby shower is probably when you're going to get no sweets. But here's why I recommend this. Because in our moral lives, we're going to find ourselves in situations where we want one thing, the desire is there, but the will says, no, I shouldn't do that. So we have to practice before those moments. There's nothing wrong with coffee, tea, or dark chocolate. But it is a desire I have, and if I say no to that desire, I am exercising that non-physical muscle so that in moments where I do need to make a decision, where my will overrides my desire, I have an increased odds of doing that. Not only will character come from a life of discipline, but it will come from a life of prayer. One of my former spiritual directors recommended this phenomenal book called The Soul of the Apostolate, which talks about how prayer is really at the heart of our apostolic activity, of our ministry work, of your teaching vocation. Any action you do really needs to spring from the place of prayer, which James spoke so beautifully about. And there's an image given in this book by St. Bernard who says we are to be reservoirs and not channels. A reservoir, or channel rather, water flows through really quickly. A channel does that, but a reservoir is very different. A reservoir fills up and the excess overflows. Analogously, the channel is like the busy person doing, going, never taking time to pray. But instead, we who are busy need to slow down, need to stop, be still and know that God is God. Allow ourselves to be filled and let that excess overflow into our ministry work. But that can be difficult because there are times where we don't see the big picture. I don't know if any of you, I think it's cross-stitch. I don't cross-stitch, but I know the concept. Anyways, you can have a great picture on one side, but this is the back side. And you're like, why would anyone put that on their wall? Well, they don't put that side out. They put the actual pretty picture side. But here's the point. God sees both sides. We don't see the picture. We see the back side. So we can sometimes feel like, my life is a mess. Like, what are you doing, God? But he knows because he sees the other side. It is so important that we maintain communication with God every day. Several times a day. It doesn't have to be long, but we acknowledge his presence, even when it's hard. And I experienced the importance of acknowledging God's presence and praying to him, communing with him, a year and a half ago, the importance of this when I lived in Ontario. This is a picture of the view from the bedroom of the home that I used to live in. I am friends with a Ukrainian Catholic priest and his wife, and before I scandalize anyone, within our tradition, the Byzantine tradition within the Catholic Church under the Pope allows for men to become priests if those men are married. And so Father Roman and his wife have 6 grown children, and they knew I was moving to Ontario. Their kids have moved out, and they said, why don't you live with us for the time that you're here? And so I lived in their rectory house. They're like second parents to me. And this beautiful view of their church, all wood, onion-domed, a Ukrainian Catholic church, was what I saw every morning, every evening when I looked at my window. Absolutely breathtaking. To give you a sense of the beauty of St. Elias, I'm just going to play a short video. So as you can see, absolutely gorgeous. It took 10 years for an iconographer from the Ukraine to complete all that iconography. There is no electricity in the sanctuary. The church is lit only by sunlight streaming through the windows and beeswax candles. It looks beautiful, it smells beautiful, incense used, absolutely heaven on earth. But on April 5th, 2014, my world and the world of the parishioners of St. Elias was shattered. I woke up Saturday morning to this, which quickly turned into that, and that. And that was my view the next day. I tell you this story to reinforce the importance of communing with God and praising God even in the difficult times. Because after that happened, within hours of the fire, people were flocking to the rectory. We had probably 200 people packed into the house. And Father Roman came out of his office, having watched the church that he spent his whole life raising money for and building from nothing into what it was, watching it burn to the ground. He came out of his office with the deacon and the cantor, and he started handing out papers, and he said, "We are right now going to have a service of thanksgiving, because we're going to thank God for the 25 years we did have with the church." And he started the service off with a passage from Job. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And we all had to reply, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." And he said a second time, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." And we said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." And a third time, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Father Roman taught me to never stop communicating with God, even when life is tough. And that became very real this past year. On April 5th, 2015, 1 year to the day of the fire, the desire of my heart came true. And after longing for so many years to get married, I was proposed to, and I said yes. But 2 months later, we broke up. And when I went to the Adoration Chapel at St. Anthony's in Marpole, where I used to go when I lived in that area 10 years ago, when I went that night, after sobbing like I'd never sobbed before, I stared at Jesus in the Adoration Chapel, and he stared at me. And I thought, what am I going to tell everyone? And then the fire came to my mind, and Father Roman came to my mind. And I thought, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I was very peaceful in that chapel. And I wish I could tell you that for the past 3 months I had maintained that heavenly peace. But I haven't. In fact, I recently experienced the darkest experience of my life, where I didn't feel God. And I got very angry at God. And I want to tell you this because that is the human experience. And you and your students at some point in life are going to experience suffering and hardship. And in those moments, Satan wants us to stop communicating with God. And I want to tell you what carried me through the darkest time of my life. One, I brought the darkness into the light, and I told my spiritual director everything going on in my head and how mad I was at God. He's out of the province, so I also met with my other former spiritual director, Father James Hughes. I had coffee with him. Priest should get an award for dealing with sobbing women. But I told Father James exactly how angry I was because Satan wants to keep all that in the darkness, and we have to bring it into the light. And then I was lamenting to Father, and I said, yeah, and then I got this angry at God, and I thought this, and then I felt guilty. And then Father James compassionately looked at me, and then he said, "You know, Stephanie, you know what we Catholics do when we feel guilty." And I just looked at him, I'm like, what? He goes, "We go to confession." Now, don't ask me why I didn't go to Father there. But then I decided, which is my second point, go to confession, embrace the sacraments. I went to a different church, went to confession, and let's just say the priest wasn't so compassionate the way Father James had been, and I didn't have the best confession experience of my life. I almost wanted to start guiding the priest and be like, "Could you be a little nicer, Father?" But I didn't, because I know two things. I was sorry, and he absolved me. I tell you this because you yourselves may have experienced a time where you went to confession and you didn't like what the priest said, or you didn't like how he treated you, and you stopped going. Don't stop going. Because if you're sorry and if you're absolved, It doesn't matter how you feel as you interact with the priest. So when we go through hard times, we go to confession, we embrace the sacraments, we bring what's in darkness into the light, and we continually communicate. There have been days where I could not say the rosary. I could not say the Our Father or the Hail Mary, but let me tell you what my prayers were, and God is very happy with those prayers. Help. Literally, that's it. Help. That is a prayer that delights God. Abba. There have been days where all I can repeatedly say is Abba, Jesus, the name, over and over again. As was up on the PowerPoint, Father James said to me, be like the centurion who said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. That is a prayer. The blind man who cried out to Jesus, Lord, that I may see. These are all prayers. And so if you find yourself in a dark place where you're angry at God, don't stop going to church. Get at the back, sit down, cross your arms, look at him and say, God, I'm angry at you. That's communicating. And the toxic thing to any relationship is a breakdown of communication when we stop talking. So keep talking, even if the talking is different. Keep going to Mass. Keep going to confession. And when you enter into that life of continual prayer and discipline, then you will have that character needed to proclaim Jesus with loving hearts. You will have that attractive manner. To wrap things up, I'd like to end where I began. I told you about what caused Michael Morton to be unjustly put into prison. I'd like to share with you an encounter he had the day he was freed from prison. After taken to the courtroom where the judge set him free, the lawyers that had helped him were all around him and were about to drive him to a celebratory dinner. And in his book, Michael writes the following. We piled into my brother-in-law's truck and were pulling out of the parking lot when I saw Barry, one of the lawyers, walking towards us, holding a woman by the arm. She was crying. She had been on my jury. She was a former high school teacher who for 25 years had told her students how she'd done her civic duty and sent me to prison. Now she knew that everything she had believed for so many years was wrong. This poor soul was standing outside our truck, tear-streaked and aching with remorse. My lawyers were eager to get me out of there, and frankly, I was ready to get on with my life. Still, I felt I couldn't just leave her. This is what Michael Morton looked like the day he was in that courtroom. And I'd like you to look at his face as I read you the rest. I couldn't just leave her because I knew too well what it was like to hurt all alone. I reached out the window and did the only thing I could do at that moment. I cupped her cheek in my hand, and I tried to reassure her that it was okay, that I understood, that it wasn't her fault, and that it was time we all began putting our pain behind us. How is it possible for Michael Morton to be so merciful and so forgiving? Because he was attached to the source of mercy itself. Abide in me, the scriptures tell us. How is it possible that he could proclaim Christ's forgiveness in that action? Because of what he said. The words from the beginning of my talk. Michael Morton says, I know 3 little simple things. 1, God exists. 2, he is wise. And 3, he loves me. If we believe that, we got to proclaim it. But if we're going to proclaim it, we need that knowledge, that accurately informed mind. We need the artful method of wisdom, which gets us to ask questions and seek to understand and be present to the other. And we need character, that attractive manner that is built from a life of discipline and a life of prayer, a life of union and communion with God. And I can tell you from personal experience, when we stay in communion with the source of our life, we find joy and we find beauty. Thank you very much, and God bless you.